Okay, across pretty much all of draft Twitter, you are going to find that the #1 wide receiver for most people is Jordan Addison. Now, he may not be my #1. I do think that he has a ton of positives on his profile. I mean, this is a former Bolitnikoff winner. This is someone who's dominated across multiple programs. This is someone who got paid God knows how much money to transfer over to USC. So I'm going to dive into exactly why you should be excited about Jordan Addison, maybe some reasons why you should not actually have him as your wide receiver 1, and some good landing spots when he does get drafted, and he'll be close to a top 10 draft pick. But before we get into anything, make sure you go down there, you drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, and if you ever want to check out any of these cool player props, if you want to get into a draft with us in the live stream, you know, we just won $150,000 on Underdog Fantasy, drafted over 700 teams there this offseason. You can sign up for Underdog Fantasy with the link in the comment section, the link in the description. When you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100, and you'll get our 2023 Dynasty rankings. One last note, our meetup is January 14th, 2 p.m. at Zilker Park in Austin, Texas. Completely free. I really hope that we get to see you there. But that should be about it. Let's go through. Let's dive into Jordan Addison. And coming out of high school, this was a player that obviously had offers a ton of different places. I mean, he was a 4-star recruit. He ended up going to Pitt, where what you love to see and what we've seen consistently translate to success at the NFL level is early dominance in college. Usually players that turn out to be top dogs, usually players that go to the top of the food chain, are guys that can dominate as early as 18 years old. Usually if you have to break out your junior season, your senior year, I mean, usually that means you just played against 18-year-old kids you were bigger than, and that wasn't really going to translate to the NFL level. But no, Jordan Addison, his first year at Pitt, averages 66 receiving yards per game, which from a market share perspective was good for him to actually account for 25% of the receiving yards on a per game basis at Pitt. His actually touchdowns per game through the air was up at 30%. So you're going to see a continued trend with Jordan Addison that his market share numbers in the touchdown category are actually higher than what you'd find with his yardage. And going over to his sophomore season, this is when he wins the Bolitnikoff. This is when everybody takes note and he becomes a national name. He averages 113 receiving yards per game. Unbelievable. This is as a true sophomore. Going back to what we were discussing earlier, this production early on in your collegiate career is significantly more impressive than if you were doing it at 20, 21, 22 years old. Being able to demonstrate this dominance at 19 gives him a phenomenal hit rate at the next level. But if we are looking under the hood, if we are keeping in mind the context of the offense at Pitt, this isn't as impressive as it initially seems. Now, of course, it's great. And of course, you should be excited about Jordan Addison. And I don't want to take too much away from him. But we do need to be at least intellectually honest with each other and say he was doing it in the best situation possible. If you were looking at the level of competition for targets that he had at Pitt, I mean, these aren't no-name players, but he's not going up against the same level of competition that you would have at an Alabama, that you would have at an Ohio State. You're not going up against Jamison Williams, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson when you're Jackson Smith and Jigba. No, you're going up against a bunch of 3-star, 4-star guys at Pitt. But the #1 thing that we need to keep in mind is you're playing with Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett this season went through and he had 4,300 passing yards. Kenny Pickett threw 42 passing touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and ended up getting himself drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. So if we're looking at the market share numbers, while yes, it's still incredibly impressive for Jordan Addison to average the 113 receiving yards per game, in the context of his offense, he was accounting for 33% of the receiving yards on a per game basis in this Pittsburgh offense. This is identical to what you had with Quentin Johnson in his sophomore season. This is identical to what you had with Jackson Smith and Jigba in his sophomore season. And keep in mind, you have to look at the context of their situations where Jordan Addison, as well as Quentin Johnson, they're not going up against the Chris Olave, the Garrett Wilson that we already discussed previously in this video. Now, going over to his junior season, This was a down year. Now, I know a lot of people are going to try to sell it as this was a great thing. You transfer over to USC and immediately you vault yourself to the #1 wide receiver spot on this depth chart. Immediately you find yourself as the top dog in a very good Lincoln Riley offense. But he does take a significant step backwards to only 79 receiving yards per game. And if we're looking at the market share numbers, it's not like we can make the excuse, okay, well, yeah, he only had 79 receiving yards per game. He took that massive step backwards because the USC offense was significantly worse than what you had with Kenny Pickett and Pitt. No. We know Lincoln Riley. We know Heisman Trophy winning. This was a good offense, okay? He only accounted for 23% of his team's receiving yardage on a per-game basis his junior season. Now, this is not unprecedented. We've seen players have phenomenal sophomore years where they break out and display dominance at an extremely young age to fall back their junior season and to still have an incredible amount of success at the NFL level. The best example that I can think of this is actually another USC wide receiver. Now, keep in mind, he was at USC for his entire career, but Juju Smith-Schuster was a player that people were so excited about after his sophomore year, but then fell back to earth his junior season, and that's why he ended up going in the second round to Pittsburgh in that 2017 NFL draft. So maybe you want to make that same argument that honestly, we shouldn't be looking too much at a year that he just transferred in his junior season. And instead, we should be primarily focusing on the most impressive season that he had in his sophomore year. And that is a fair argument to make. And it would be different if his junior season, very similar to a Jackson Smith and Jigba, you're at Ohio State, you're going up against Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, wide receivers that are dominant and older than you, and that's why it's hard for you to give that top level production. But no, you're going up against a bunch of 3-star and 4-star guys at USC. I mean, the other leading receivers, you have Taj Washington, 3-star player, Mario Williams, Brendan Rice, Kyle Ford, all 4-star guys, but still, I don't want to act like this is a 5-star name that you're going to have at Alabama or Ohio State. Now, with Jordan Addison, I think that if we are comparing him to the other top options in this class, he's still clearly inside the top 3. At the risk of being repetitive, I think you're going to end up with Jackson Smith and Jigba as the wide receiver 1. And then afterwards, you're going to have Quentin Johnson as well as Jordan Addison, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, dependent on both NFL draft capital as well as the landing spots that they're going to. Now, with Jordan Addison, what you do really like to see is if the NFL draft is going to give him this much credit to be a top 10 pick and be the #1 wide receiver in this class, that's something to get very excited about, because we know that with NFL draft capital, it may not correlate 1-for-1 with fantasy football success, especially at the wide receiver position, because NFL teams are always going to value those wide receivers that provide you speed, that can stretch NFL defenses and may not command a lot of volume from a fantasy football perspective. They're going to value those guys higher than the players that are working closer to the line of scrimmage, dominating the target share, and racking up receiving yards. The perfect example we can always go to is the NFL valuing Henry Ruggs in that 2020 class higher than Jerry Jeudy in the NFL draft, despite Jerry Jeudy being the wide receiver 1 in his offense. And the NFL may or may not have been right with that decision at the time, but the reason they made it was due to the speed that Henry Ruggs possessed. They never thought he was going to have more receiving yards than Jerry Jeudy, but NFL teams don't care about that, as we should in fantasy. And if we're looking at the profile of a Jordan Addison, this isn't one of those speedy wide receivers that's going to be the field stretcher on the outside. He doesn't profile to be John Ross. He doesn't profile to be Henry Ruggs. Instead, he is going to be someone that's operating close to the line of scrimmage. The primary value he's driving is the ability to rack up volume and the ability to score fantasy points. So if he does get the NFL draft capital, I think that's going to matter a lot more than we've seen with those speedsters. The guys like Kevin White, John Ross, Henry Ruggs that we've already discussed. And if we're looking at potential landing spots that you have, I mean, there are a decent amount of spots that you would like to see. Right now, according to NFL Mock Draft Database, they have him projected to be the 10th pick overall. This is ahead of every other wide receiver in this draft class. And if we're looking at teams around 10, I mean, at 9, the Carolina Panthers are a team that really needs some wide receiver help to play alongside DJ Moore. Now, I mean, if we're looking at profiles of wide receivers that you'd possibly like a little more to complement DJ Moore's skill set, maybe you're going to go for a Quentin Johnson then. That way you can actually have that size alongside DJ Moore. But next to that, you have the Tennessee Titans at 11. Maybe they want to pair someone up with Treylon Burks for the long term. Jordan Addison could be a fit there. Maybe it could be a fit at 12 to the Houston Texans. If Houston's able to solve their quarterback situation at 2, then you have the Jets at 13. I think it could be a nice pairing to Garrett Wilson. You have the New England Patriots at 15. This could be a perfect guy for Mac Jones to pair up long-term because Mac Jones doesn't really have anybody. Then you have the Green Bay Packers 16. I mean, it would be very, very interesting if Jordan Addison ended up falling to pick 18 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you end up with Pittsburgh reuniting Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison, which I think a lot of people could be extremely excited about. But let me know what you think. Right now, I think I still have Jackson Smith-Njigba as my wide receiver 1. We have Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson as wide receiver 2, 3 dependent on landing spot, NFL draft capital dependent on the NFL Combine as well. But that's all I got for you. Thank you again. I truly do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day. If you want to come out to the Fantasy Flock Network meetup this Saturday, January 14th, 2 p.m., Austin, Texas, Zilker Park. Really hoping I get to see you there. And also, if you want to check out any of these player props any single week, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, in the comment section. When you sign up for Underdog and use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. And you are going to get our 2023 Dynasty rankings. But thank you again. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day, and hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.